The stagecoach felt like a wooden coffin rattling over the raw Montana earth. Dust clawed its way through the cracks, a gritty fog that tasted of endings and bad beginnings. Inside, Katerina Petrova held a leather journal to her chest, as if it could stop a bullet. Its pages were filled with the ghost of her homeland, the scent of her mother's kitchen, the ink of a future she prayed was real. She was traveling 4,000 miles to marry a man she'd never seen. A man who had paid for her passage across an ocean and a continent. A man who promised security in a world that had offered her none. But Katerina didn't know the truth about James Miller. She didn't know that the moment he heard her voice, the carefully written words of their letters would turn to ash in his mouth. And she couldn't possibly know that in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of Montana, a different kind of man was watching, waiting. A man who knew that her accent wasn't a flaw, it was a clue. The year was 1885. The final miles to Silver Creek were brutal. The stagecoach lurched, throwing Katerina against the worn leather seat. She gripped the window frame, her knuckles white. Her other hand never left the journal. It was all she had left of her life before. Recipes that tasted like home. Folk remedies for heartaches and fevers. Stories of her Czech village, a place that felt a lifetime away. 23 days. 23 days since she'd left Prague, each mile a stitch sewing her old life shut. Now, she was hurtling toward a new one, with a man she knew only from ink on paper. She smoothed her best dress, a midnight blue fabric she had embroidered herself. The patterns were ancient, a language of thread her mother had taught her. A small mirror in her handbag showed a face she barely recognized. 24 years old, with dark hair in a tight, practical bun, and eyes the color of worry. Her mother said her beauty was in her hands, hands that could cook and sew and create. She prayed it would be enough. "Silver Creek," the driver shouted as they finally crested a ridge. Katerina pressed her face to the dusty glass. Her new home was smaller than she'd imagined. A raw collection of wooden buildings huddled together on a single dusty street, as if afraid of the endless grasslands surrounding them. In the distance, mountains stabbed at a sky so wide it made her feel insignificant. This wasn't the ancient forested embrace of Bohemia. This was a raw, new world. And despite her exhaustion, a flicker of hope ignited in her chest. After her parents were taken by typhus, the village had become a cage of pity and shrinking possibilities. The advertisement in the matrimonial newsletter felt like a key. Established Montana rancher seeks bride of good character, must be hardworking, capable of managing a household. Will pay passage for a suitable candidate. James Miller. His letters were practical, devoid of poetry. He wrote of his ranch, his legacy, his need for a sensible wife. Katerina hadn't wanted poetry. She wanted a foundation on which to build a life, security, respect. Maybe in time something more. The stagecoach groaned to a halt. "End of the line, folks," the driver called, his boots thudding in the dust. Katerina took a deep breath, a prayer for courage, and stepped out into the oppressive sun. The street was a sea of unfamiliar faces, men in rough work clothes, women with weary eyes. She searched for the man from the letters. 40 years old, he'd written. Tall, with sandy hair and a mustache. No photograph. He'd considered it an unnecessary expense. "Miss Petrova." The voice cut through the noise. A man stepped forward, tall and well-dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the rugged town. Sandy hair, thinning just a little. A neatly trimmed mustache. He matched the description. But something was wrong. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Indeed," he said. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over her. It wasn't a greeting, it was an inspection. "Welcome to Silver Creek." Thank you, Katarina managed, her Czech accent feeling thick and heavy in her throat. I'm very pleased to be meeting you at last. A flicker of something cold and hard crossed his face. It was there and gone in a heartbeat. But she had seen it, and a knot of ice formed in her stomach. Your journey was comfortable, I trust? James asked. His tone was chillingly formal. As comfortable as such a journey can be, she answered honestly. He gave a curt nod, then gestured to a boy. Tommy, fetch Miss Petrova's trunks. He turned back to her, the ghost of a polite smile on his lips. I thought you might appreciate some refreshment before we head to the ranch. It was a thoughtful gesture, but it felt rehearsed, calculated. She took his offered arm. His coat felt stiff, unyielding. He led her to a small restaurant inside the town's only hotel. The air inside was cool and smelled of stale beer and fried meat. Mr. Miller, the owner said, rushing forward. Your usual table is ready. James led her to a corner table, a position from which he could survey the entire room. A waitress brought water and coffee without being asked. She knew his order. The special for the lady, James told her, then dismissed her with a wave. When they were alone, he studied her again. This time his gaze was sharp, analytical. The silence stretched until it was a physical weight. Your letters, he said, his voice flat. They didn't mention how pronounced your accent would be. The words were a slap. Heat flooded her cheeks. I did write that English is not my first language, she said, her voice small. Yes, but I assumed you would be more fluent, he replied, taking a sip of water. His eyes never left hers. Your written English was quite good. My cousin, he helped with the letters, she admitted, feeling like a fraud. He went to university. James's expression tightened. I see. She tried to salvage the moment, to find the man from the letters. The landscape is magnificent. Your descriptions did not do it justice. It's a land of opportunity, he agreed, but his enthusiasm felt hollow. For those who know how to seize it, we are building a new civilization here, a proper American civilization. There it was again. Proper American. I've been preparing the house for your arrival, he continued. My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, has prepared the east bedroom for you. Until the wedding. The wedding. The word landed on the table between them like a stone. When do you envision the ceremony? She asked. This Sunday, he said, as if discussing the price of cattle. Reverend Shepherd is prepared. I've already spoken with him. Nothing elaborate, just respectable. The town has been curious about my foreign bride. Foreign bride. The phrase was a brand searing into her skin. Was that all she was to him? An exotic acquisition? I had thought, she began carefully, perhaps we might take some time to become better acquainted. His eyebrows lifted in faint, mocking surprise. You've traveled over 4,000 miles to marry me, Miss Petrova. Are you having second thoughts? Not at all, she said quickly. Too quickly. I simply thought. My ranch is 12 miles from town, he cut in, his voice firm. It would be improper for you to reside there unwed. We must think of appearances. Of course, appearances. Their food arrived, a momentary reprieve. Roast beef and potatoes. Simple, plain, American. She realized she was starving, but the food had no taste. Tell me, James said after a few bites. Do you plan to continue with your native customs here? The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. What do you mean by native customs? The food you cook, the clothes you wear, he clarified, his gaze dropping to the delicate embroidery on her collar. That stitching on your dress, it's very ethnic. The cold knot in her stomach tightened into a fist of ice. This is traditional Czech embroidery, she said, her voice tight with a pride she refused to surrender. My mother taught me. Each pattern has a meaning. I see, he said, his tone measured, condescending. While such skills are admirable, Silver Creek is an American town. As my wife, you will be expected to maintain an American household. Our community values integration, not foreign displays. Integration does not mean erasing where one comes from, she responded, her voice a low whisper of defiance. It means erasing who you were, James corrected, setting his fork down with a sharp click. Who you will become, as Mrs. James Miller, is something entirely different. The man from the letters was gone. Or perhaps he had never existed at all. Maybe he was just a mask, a carefully crafted lie to lure her across the world. And now, the mask was slipping. Perhaps we both made assumptions that reality has not borne out, Katerina said, her voice shaking. James's jaw tightened. He glanced around the restaurant, aware of the curious stares they were attracting. Let's continue this discussion privately, he said, his voice a low hiss. My wagon is outside. Her appetite had vanished. He paid the bill, his movements stiff and angry. They walked in silence to the wagon. He helped her onto the seat, his touch cold and impersonal. The ride through town was a parade of humiliation. Every pair of eyes felt like an accusation. The foreign bride, the strange woman who wasn't good enough. Once they were on the open road, the silence became a suffocating blanket. Silver Creek is a young community, he finally said, staring straight ahead. We are building something important here, a proper town, with proper American values. The words were a threat. I arrived here with nothing 15 years ago, he said, a flicker of pride in his voice. Now, the Miller Ranch is the most successful in the territory, 25,000 acres. He had built an empire. That takes great strength, she offered, trying to find some common ground. It takes discipline, he corrected, and conformity. The old ways must be left behind. That is the price of success in America. My grandmother would say, new branches cannot grow if you cut away the roots. His hands tightened on the reins. Your grandmother wasn't building a future in Montana. They rode the rest of the way in a silence as vast and empty as the prairie around them. After an hour, his ranch came into view. It was a fortress. A sprawling two-story house, barns, corrals, bunkhouses. Everything was orderly, rigid, perfect. It wasn't a home. It was a statement of power. As they pulled up, an older woman emerged onto the porch. She was thin, with gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Wilson, my housekeeper, James said. He called out, We've returned with Miss Petrova. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. Welcome to Miller Ranch, miss. I prepared everything as instructed. James helped Katerina down. Mrs. Wilson will show you to your room. You'll want to rest. We dine at 6, sharp. Without another word, he strode away toward the barns, leaving her with the housekeeper. He hadn't even looked at her. This way, miss, Mrs. Wilson said, her voice low. The house was impressive, solid, prosperous, permanent, and cold. So cold. Mr. Miller has done well for himself, the housekeeper remarked, her voice flat. Mrs. Wilson led her up a wide staircase. The east bedroom will be yours until the wedding. The room was large and well-appointed. A 4-poster bed, a dresser, a writing desk by a window overlooking the endless grass. It felt like a beautiful prison cell. I'll have hot water sent up, Mrs. Wilson said, but she hesitated at the door. She studied Katerina with a look of intense, almost fearful curiosity. If you don't mind my asking, miss, where exactly are you from? A village near Prague, in Bohemia, Katerina explained. Mrs. Wilson nodded slowly. I see. Well, we don't get many Europeans this far west. She paused, her gaze dropping to the floor. When she looked up, Her eyes were filled with a warning. "Mr. Miller, he has very particular ideas about how things should be done," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He values order and sameness. He's not an unkind man, but—" She trailed off, glancing nervously down the hall. "But what, Mrs. Wilson?" Katerina pressed, her heart pounding. The housekeeper took a step closer. "The last one." She didn't understand that. She thought she could change him. "The last one." Katerina's blood ran cold. "What last one?" Mrs. Wilson shook her head, her eyes wide with the terror she was trying to conceal. "Be careful, miss. Just be careful." And then she was gone, leaving Katerina alone in the silent, ornate room with a ghost she hadn't known existed. Katerina's hands trembled as she unpacked her few belongings. The last one. The words echoed in the cavernous silence of the room. Had there been another bride, another woman who had traveled across the world only to fail James Miller's test of sameness? She placed a small, hand-carved wooden horse on the bedside table. It was a gift from her father, a tiny piece of home in this vast, terrifying place. She changed her dress, choosing a simpler one, trying to make herself smaller, less ethnic, less of a target. A knock at the door made her jump. A young girl, no older than 14, entered with a pitcher of hot water. "I'm Sarah, the kitchen helper," she said, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You really are foreign," she blurted out, then blushed. "I'm sorry, miss." "It is the truth," Katerina said, managing a weak smile. "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked. "Your home?" The simple question cracked through Katerina's composure. "Yes," she whispered. "But life moves forward. We must make a new home where we find ourselves." "Mrs. Wilson says dinner is at 6 sharp," Sarah said, turning to leave. She paused at the door. "That other lady, she was foreign too, but different from you." Before Katerina could ask what she meant, the girl scurried away. The other lady. So it was true. There had been someone else. Katerina opened her journal, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. She wrote of James, of his coldness, of the house that felt like a tomb. And she wrote of the warning from Mrs. Wilson and the ghost of the woman who came before. At 5 minutes to 6, she went downstairs. James was already at the head of the long dining table. He stood when she entered, a perfect gentleman, a perfect stranger. "I trust you've rested," he said. "Yes, thank you." She took her seat. The space between them felt like a mile of frozen ground. The meal was a silent ordeal. Mrs. Wilson served the food with a tense efficiency, her eyes darting between Katerina and James. Katerina tried to make conversation, to find the man she thought she knew. "I brought many recipes from home," she offered. "Perhaps I could prepare a check meal sometime." A flicker of annoyance crossed James's face. "I'm not sure the ranch hands would appreciate foreign food. Americans prefer what's familiar." "Not all Americans, Mr. Miller." A new voice, deep and resonant, came from the doorway. Katerina turned. A man stood there, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and startlingly blue eyes. He was dressed in rugged ranch clothes, but he wore them with an easy confidence James lacked in his tailored suit. James's face tightened with raw, undisguised hatred. "Thornton," he spat, "I wasn't expecting you." The man, Thornton, stepped into the room, removing his hat. His gaze met Katerina's for a brief, intense moment. There was interest there, and something else. Concern. "Forgive the interruption," he said, his voice smooth as riverstone. "There's a problem with the north fence line. Looks like someone's been cutting the wire." James shot to his feet. "Rustlers. I knew it." He turned to Katerina. "Please excuse me. This requires my immediate attention." As he moved toward the door, he stopped beside Thornton. You'll see yourself out." Thornton smiled faintly. It didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, Mrs. Wilson invited me for dinner, said there was plenty." He looked at Katerina. "Michael Thornton, I own the neighboring ranch." Before James could argue, Mrs. Wilson appeared. "I did invite him, sir." Seemed hospitable. James's jaw worked. "Very well. Entertain our guest until I return." He shot Thornton a look that could kill, and then he was gone. An unnerving silence fell. "Please sit." Katerina gestured to the empty chair. Michael Thornton sat down, his movements fluid and graceful. He served himself, his eyes scanning the room. He glanced at the embroidery on her cuffs. "Check, if I'm not mistaken," he said. She was stunned. "Yes. How did you know?" "I try to pay attention to the world around me," he replied, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Too many folks out here only see what they expect to see." The words were a clear jab at James. "What brings you to Montana, Miss Petrova?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Mr. Miller and we have a practical arrangement." He nodded. "A mail-order bride, a common enough practice. Though usually—" He stopped himself. "Usually what?" she pressed. He studied her for a long moment. "Usually the brides aren't coming from quite so far, and usually the groom doesn't have a history of them disappearing." The room suddenly felt airless. Disappearing. The word hung between them, a venomous snake ready to strike. Katerina stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What do you mean, disappearing?" Michael Thornton's expression was grim. He lowered his voice, leaning slightly across the table. "There was another woman, about a year ago, from Hungary. Miller brought her here, same as you. Sarah, the kitchen girl. She mentioned another lady." "Her name was Ilona," Michael said. "She was here for 2 months. Then one day she was gone. Miller told everyone she couldn't handle the frontier life, that he'd paid for her passage back home." He paused, his blue eyes locking with hers. "I never believed him." "Why?" Katerina whispered. "Because Ilona sent a letter to her sister just before she vanished. I know, because her family hired investigators. They came to me. In the letter, Ilona said she had discovered something terrible. Something about what Miller was really doing on this ranch. She said she was afraid for her life." The food on Katerina's plate seemed to mock her. A life of security, a respectable home. It was all a lie. A beautiful, terrifying lie. What did she discover? She didn't say. The letter was cut short. After that, nothing. No one ever heard from Ilona again. The investigation went nowhere. Miller has a lot of power in this territory. He can make problems, and people disappear. Katerina felt a wave of nausea. The house, which had felt cold before, now felt actively malevolent. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I saw the same look in your eyes that I saw in hers," he said softly. "The look of a bird in a gilded cage. And because that embroidery on your dress, it's very similar to a pattern on a shawl Ilona left behind. It told me you were from the same part of the world. A world Miller doesn't understand and doesn't want to." Heavy footsteps in the hall announced James's return. Michael sat back, his expression becoming neutral, but his eyes held a clear warning. "Be careful." James stormed into the dining room, his face a mask of fury. He glared at Michael. "I see you've made yourself at home, Thornton." "Just enjoying your hospitality," Michael replied smoothly, rising from his chair. "Miss Petrova, it's been a pleasure. I hope you find happiness here." The words were for her, but the meaning was a sharp, pointed threat aimed at James. After Michael left, James paced the room like a caged animal. "Thornton is a troublemaker," he spat. "He fills people's heads with foreign ideas. Don't listen to a word he says. His charm masks a dangerous disregard for our ways. Our ways. The words were a cage, and the door was swinging shut. Later, alone in her room, Katerina couldn't sleep. The ghost of Ilona was everywhere. In the rustle of the curtains, in the creak of the floorboards. Was this the room where she had slept? Was this the desk where she had written that final, desperate letter? Driven by a fear she couldn't name, Katerina began to search. She ran her hands along the floorboards, tapped the walls, checked behind the heavy dresser. Nothing. Then she saw it. A small, loose piece of wood at the back of the wardrobe. Her fingers fumbled with it, her heart pounding. It came away in her hand. Inside the small, dark cavity was a book, a journal, just like hers. But this one was filled with elegant Hungarian script. And tucked inside the back cover was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a letter. It was a map. A crude drawing of the ranch, with a section of the north pasture circled. And next to it, a series of numbers and a single, chilling word. Below. The next morning, the house was a hive of tense activity. James was cold and distant. He informed Katerina that he would be taking her into town that afternoon for wedding preparations. The words were a threat. The wedding was in 2 days. Time was running out. She spent the morning in the kitchen with Mrs. Wilson and Sarah, her mind racing. Ilona's journal was hidden safely in her own, the map a burning secret against her skin. She couldn't read the Hungarian, but the terror in the frantic, slanting script was a universal language. And the map, what was hidden below the north pasture? As she helped prepare vegetables, Katerina hummed a Czech folk song, a nervous habit from childhood. "That's pretty," Sarah said. Katerina smiled and sang the words softly, the familiar melody a small comfort in the suffocating fear. Even Mrs. Wilson seemed to relax slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. For a few minutes, the kitchen felt like a safe haven. Then, a sharp knock at the back door shattered the peace. A ranch hand stood there. "Mr. Miller wants the Czech lady, at the north pasture, right away." Katerina's blood turned to ice. The north pasture, the place on Ilona's map. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice tight. "Just said to bring you," the man grunted. The buggy ride was a journey toward a fate she couldn't see. The ranch hand, Frank, was silent and grim. As they crested a hill, she saw them, a group of armed ranch hands on horseback, surrounding a small makeshift camp. And in the center, James. His posture was rigid with fury. As she got closer, she saw who they had captured. 3 men, seated on the ground, their hands bound behind them. They looked exhausted, terrified, and their faces were Czech. James strode over as she stepped down from the buggy, his expression thunderous. "I need you to speak with these men," he said, his voice like gravel. "Why?" she asked, her heart pounding. "Because they claim to be your countrymen," he sneered. "But I know what they really are. They're the rustlers who've been plaguing this territory. They're spies, sent by Thornton to ruin me." He gestured to the bound men. "Translate. Expose their lies." Katerina walked toward the men, her legs trembling. The oldest, a man with a gray beard and weary, honest eyes, looked up at her. She addressed him in Czech. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Relief washed over his face, so profound it was heartbreaking. "Thank God," he said in their shared tongue. "We are lost. We are traveling to a settlement called New Prague. Our map was poor. We are not thieves." He explained their story. They were immigrants, just like her, a father, a son, and a nephew, trying to reach family. They were farmers and a blacksmith, not criminals. Katerina turned back to James. "They are who they say they are," she said, her voice firm. Innocent travelers who are lost. James's face hardened. A convenient story. They were found near where my fence was cut. They have tools. The young one is a blacksmith, she protested. They have papers. Papers can be forged, he dismissed. The marshal is coming next week. They can explain themselves to him. The casual cruelty of it stole her breath. He would keep these men tied up for days, out in the open, like animals. At least untie them, she begged. Give them food and water. They'll be given enough to survive, James said coldly. Nothing more. Anger, hot and pure, burned through her fear. These are my countrymen. Your suspicion blinds you to their humanity. And your shared background blinds you to their guilt, he retorted. This is precisely the problem with foreign entanglements, divided loyalties. He saw her compassion as a betrayal. He was a monster. A rider appeared on the horizon, galloping toward them from the west. Michael Thornton. He reined in his horse, his eyes taking in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The bound men, the armed guards, Katerina standing defiantly before James. What's happening here, Miller? He demanded. Caught your spies, Thornton, James sneered. Michael's gaze shifted to Katerina. And what do you say, Miss Petrova? They are innocent, she said without hesitation. Michael dismounted and approached the bound men. To Katerina's utter shock, he addressed the oldest man in halting but understandable Czech. I am Michael Thornton. You seek New Prague? The old man's eyes widened with hope. Yes, sir. We are lost. Michael turned back to James. I believe them, and I'm willing to take responsibility for them until the marshal arrives. The offer was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down in the dust. James's face contorted with rage. You'd harbor criminals on your property. I'd extend hospitality to travelers in need, Michael countered. This is based on what? James spat. A few words in broken Czech and her emotional reaction. It's based on instinct, Michael said, his voice dangerously low. And the knowledge that you, Miller, are a liar and a coward. The air crackled with violence. For a long moment, James seemed to consider refusing. Then, a cruel smile twisted his lips. Take them, he said. But she is staying here. Michael looked at Katerina. Will you come with us, to translate? She won't be accompanying you, James interrupted. Miss Petrova has preparations for our wedding. These men need help, Katerina said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Your obligation is here, James insisted. Your loyalty should be clear. The word was a spark on a trail of gunpowder. Her choice was simple. Stand with this monster, or stand with her people. It wasn't a choice at all. I will help these men, she said, her voice steady. James's face became a mask of cold contempt. I see. Your choice is illuminating. I require a wife whose allegiance is to me and the American way of life, not someone who rushes to the side of every foreign vagrant. He was ending it. He was casting her out. And in that moment, all she felt was a breathtaking, terrifying wave of freedom. If American values mean condemning innocent men, she said, her voice clear and strong, then perhaps I have misunderstood what America means. James's face flushed a deep, mottled red. You have made your choice, Miss Petrova. Collect your things. I expect you to be gone by the time I return. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode away without a backward glance. He had discarded her. But he didn't know her secret. He didn't know she had Ilona's journal. And he didn't know she had the map. The journey back to the ranch house was a blur. Katerina felt a strange, light-headed clarity. The future she had traveled 4,000 miles for had dissolved in an instant. Now, there was only the raw, terrifying present. Mrs. Wilson met her at the door, her face etched with worry. When Katerina explained she was leaving, the housekeeper's expression shifted to something that looked like relief. "I can't say I'm shocked," she whispered, helping Katerina pack. "He is not a man who can be bent, and you, child, are not a woman who can be broken." As she packed, Katerina's hands found her violin case, the instrument her father had given her, a piece of her soul. She placed it on top of her things, a symbol of the identity she refused to surrender. Frank, the grim-faced ranch hand, drove her to the trail junction where Michael waited with the now-freed Czech travelers. As they loaded her trunks onto Michael's wagon, Katerina's world shifted on its axis. She was no longer a mail-order bride. She was a woman without a home, without a plan, in the middle of the vast Montana territory. Her only allies were a mysterious rancher and 3 of her countrymen who were as lost as she was. As they traveled toward Michael's ranch, the Crosswind, he rode beside her buggy. "Miller is more than just a bigot," he said, his voice low and urgent. "He's dangerous. Ilona didn't just disappear because she was Hungarian. She disappeared because she found out what he was really doing." "What is he doing?" Katerina asked. "This territory is about to become a state. There's a war brewing over land, water rights, and power. Miller plans to win that war. The rustling, the cut fences. It's a distraction. He's creating chaos so he can control the outcome." He looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "Ilona found proof, something that could expose him. I think it's hidden on the ranch. That's why he's so paranoid about his property lines. He's not protecting cattle, he's protecting a secret." Katerina's hand instinctively went to the journal hidden in her satchel. The map, below. Was this the proof Michael was looking for? The Crosswind Ranch came into view as the sun began to set. It was nothing like Miller's fortress. It was smaller, built of logs and stone that seemed to grow out of the land itself. It felt like a part of the landscape, not a conqueror of it. And the people, the workers, were a mix of faces. Mexican vaqueros, a black foreman, even a Native American family mending a fence. "I hire based on skill, not background," Michael explained. "Miller calls it undermining the proper order. I call it common sense." A tall, dignified woman with Native American features met them on the porch. "Martha," Michael said. "She runs this household with terrifying efficiency, tolerates no nonsense from anyone, myself included." Martha's dark, intelligent eyes took in the entire situation in a single glance. "Guests for dinner, I see," she said, her voice calm, "and some needing more than just a meal." The welcome was unconditional. The Czech travelers were given a cabin, and Katerina was shown to a simple, clean guest room. It wasn't a gilded cage. It felt safe. That evening, the dinner table was a vibrant mix of languages and cultures. Spanish, English, Czech, and the occasional Shoshone word from Martha. It was loud, chaotic, and wonderful. After dinner, Joseph, the oldest of the Czech men, played a folk song on a battered harmonica. The mournful, hopeful tune filled the room. On impulse, Katerina retrieved her violin. She joined him, the familiar melody pouring from her, a story of sorrow and resilience. When the last note faded, she looked up. Michael was watching her, his expression filled with an admiration that made her heart ache. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. Later, after the others had gone to bed, Michael found her on the porch, staring out at the star-dusted sky. "You never told me what happened back there," he said. "When Miller found the travelers, what made him so certain they were my spies?" Katerina took a deep breath. It was time. She retrieved Ilona's journal from her bag. "Because he has something to hide," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "And I think this is the proof." She handed him the journal and the folded map. He opened it. His face was grim in the moonlight as he stared at the drawing of the north pasture, at the circled area, at the numbers, and at the single word, below. Michael looked up from the map, his face a mask of sudden dawning horror. "My God," he whispered. "It's not weapons. It's not smuggled goods." He stared at the numbers again, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. "These aren't coordinates. They're dates." He looked at Katerina, his eyes dark with a terrible understanding. "He's not burying secrets, Katerina. He's burying bodies." The revelation hung in the cold night air, a monstrous, unbelievable truth. James Miller wasn't just a criminal, he was a killer. "Ilona must have found one of them," Michael said, his voice a strained whisper. "That's what she discovered. That's why he got rid of her." The ghost that had haunted Katerina's room now had a face, a story, a brutal end, and she was likely not the only one. The dates, Michael traced the numbers on the map with his finger. 3 of them, over the last 5 years. These are his mistakes, the people who stood in his way, the ones he couldn't just run out of the territory. Katerina's mind reeled. The man she had agreed to marry, the man who had written of building a legacy, had built it on a foundation of graves. "We have to go to the marshal," she said, her voice shaking. Michael shook his head. "It's not enough. Miller owns the local deputy. The territorial marshal is a good man, but he's 50 miles away. By the time he gets here, Miller will have moved whatever is buried there. This map is just a piece of paper without proof. We need to know what's in the ground." A reckless, terrifying idea began to form in his eyes. "We have to go back to the Miller ranch?" Katerina stared at him in disbelief. "He'll kill us." "Not if he doesn't know we're there," Michael said, his voice hardening with resolve. "Tomorrow, Miller is taking you to town for the wedding preparations. That was his plan. He'll stick to it to maintain appearances. He won't expect anyone to be at the north pasture. It's the perfect time." "We?" Katerina asked. "Who is we?" "Me and Joseph's nephew, Martin, the blacksmith. We'll need his strength to dig. The others will stay here. If we're not back by morning, they ride for the marshal." It was insane. It was suicide. But as she looked at Ilona's map, she knew they had no other choice. This was about more than just their own safety now. It was about justice for the woman who had died trying to expose the truth. "I'm coming with you," she said. "No," Michael said firmly. "It's too dangerous." "The map is mine," she countered, her voice ringing with newfound steel. "Ilona's journal is in my possession. Her ghost is my responsibility. I am not a woman who waits behind while others fight my battles. I am coming with you." He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes warring with a fierce, unyielding determination. And he saw not a fragile mail-order bride, but a partner, an equal. He finally nodded. "All right, but you do exactly as I say." The next day passed in a haze of unbearable tension. At midday, just as Michael had predicted, a rider from the Miller ranch arrived at Crosswind. He carried a curt message for Katerina, ordering her to meet James at the trail junction. The trip to town was still on. It was the perfect alibi. Michael sent the rider back with a polite refusal. "Miss Petrova is indisposed and will not be leaving Crosswind Ranch." The message was a declaration of war. Miller would know she was defying him. He would be furious. But his arrogance would be his undoing. He would believe she was simply hiding under Thornton's protection. He would never suspect she would dare to return to his land. As dusk fell, the 3 of them, Michael, Katerina, and the young, strong blacksmith Martin, rode out, cloaked in the deepening shadows. They carried shovels, lanterns, and a heavy sense of dread. The ride to the Miller ranch was silent. Every rustle of sagebrush, every cry of a distant coyote, sending a jolt of fear through Katerina. They tethered their horses in a grove of cottonwoods a mile from the north pasture and proceeded on foot, moving like ghosts through the tall grass. The air grew cold. The vast open prairie felt like a stage, and they were trespassing. They found the spot marked on Ilona's map, a lonely stretch of land marked by a cluster of 3 oddly shaped rocks. It was indistinguishable from the miles of prairie around it. Without the map, no one would ever have looked twice. Martin struck the ground with his shovel. The sound was a cannon blast in the dead quiet. They worked in frantic, desperate silence, digging by the light of a single shielded lantern. The ground was hard, rocky. Every minute felt like an hour. Katerina stood watch, her violin case clutched in her hands. Inside it, her father's instrument, and Ilona's journal. Suddenly a sound, the unmistakable jingle of a harness. Katerina's heart stopped. She dove to the ground, pulling the lantern with her, plunging them into darkness. "Someone's coming," she whispered, her voice tight with terror. Michael and Martin froze in the shallow pit they had dug. 2 riders appeared on the ridge, dark silhouettes against the moonlit sky. They were Miller's men. A patrol. Katerina held her breath. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The riders paused, surveying the silent landscape. Then, mercifully, they rode on. Her breath came out in a ragged sob of relief. "We have to hurry," Michael urged. Martin dug with renewed frenzy. A few minutes later, his shovel struck something that wasn't a rock. It was a soft, sickening thud. He scraped away the dirt. It was wood, the splintered lid of a crude wooden box. With a final heave, he pried it open. Michael lowered the lantern. The beam of light fell on the decayed remains of a human body, and on the tattered fabric of a woman's dress. Katerina saw it. Embroidery, a Hungarian folk pattern, just like the one Michael had described on Ilona's shawl. It was her. They had found Ilona. But that wasn't all. Around the woman's neck was a silver locket. Michael carefully opened it. Inside wasn't a picture. It was a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper. A signed confession. Not from Ilona. From a man Katerina had never heard of. A sworn statement detailing Miller's plan to murder a territorial land surveyor who had discovered his illegal claims. The man who wrote it was one of Miller's own ranch hands, clearly terrified and guilt-ridden. This was the second body. Suddenly, a shout from the darkness. "Over there! I saw a light!" They had been seen. The patrol was circling back. "Go!" Michael yelled, shoving the locket into Katerina's hand. "Get back to the horses. We'll hold them off." Headlights of a wagon appeared over the ridge. It wasn't just the patrol. It was James Miller himself. He knew. Somehow he knew. Katerina ran, stumbling through the darkness, the locket clutched in her fist. Gunshots erupted behind her. She didn't look back. She just ran. She scrambled through the sagebrush, her lungs on fire, the sounds of shouting and gunfire echoing behind her. She reached the cottonwood grove, her hands shaking so violently she could barely untie the reins of her horse. She had to get away. She had to get the locket to the marshal. It was the only thing that mattered. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind a tree. It wasn't Michael. It was Frank, the grim-faced ranch hand who had driven her to the north pasture just that morning. His face was pale in the moonlight. He held a rifle. It was over. "He knows," Frank said, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "He found out you were gone. He knew you'd come back here. He sent me to wait for you." Tears streamed down Katerina's face. She had failed. Ilona, Michael, Martin, they were all lost. Frank raised the rifle. Katerina closed her eyes, clutching the locket. But he didn't point it at her. He pointed it back toward the sounds of the fighting. "He's a monster," Frank said, his voice thick with a hatred that had clearly been simmering for years. "The man in that other grave, the one who wrote that confession, he was my brother." The world tilted on its axis. Frank wasn't there to stop her. He was there to help her. "Go," he urged, his eyes blazing with a desperate fire. "Ride to Silver Creek. Don't stop for anything. The marshal's office is next to the hotel. I'll buy you some time." He turned and fired into the darkness, the muzzle flash illuminating his face, a mask of grief and vengeance. Katerina didn't wait. She swung herself onto her horse and galloped away, the wind whipping tears from her eyes. The ride to Silver Creek was a nightmare. She pushed her horse to its limit, every shadow a threat, every sound the thunder of approaching hooves. She burst into the sleeping town like a phantom, her horse lathered in sweat. She found the marshal's office and hammered on the door, screaming for help. A light appeared. A weary, grizzled man opened the door, a pistol in his hand. "What in God's name?" "James Miller," she gasped, thrusting the locket and Ilona's journal at him. "He's a murderer. They're at the North Pasture. You have to hurry." The marshal, a man named Everett, took one look at the confession in the locket, at the desperate scrawl in the journal, and his face hardened. He didn't question her. He deputized 3 men from the saloon on the spot. Within minutes, a posse was riding hard for the Miller ranch. But Katerina didn't stay behind. She couldn't. She got a fresh horse from the livery and rode with them, her heart a cold, hard stone of dread in her chest. They arrived at the North Pasture to a scene of carnage. The lanterns of Miller's men dotted the field. Frank lay dead near the shallow graves. But of Michael and Martin, there was no sign. James Miller stood by the open grave, his face illuminated by a lantern, a mask of pure evil. He saw the marshal's posse arrive, saw Katerina among them, and a look of disbelief and fury crossed his face. "She's a liar," he roared, "a hysterical foreign woman. Thornton and his men tried to ambush me. They killed my man." "Is that so, Miller?" Marshal Everett said, dismounting, his shotgun leveled. "Then you won't mind explaining this." He held up the locket. James's face went white. In that moment of stunned silence, a new sound cut through the air. The rich, powerful sound of a blacksmith's hammer striking an anvil. But there was no anvil. The sound was coming from inside one of the ranch's large steel water tanks that stood near the pasture. Clang, clang, clang. It was a code, an SOS. The marshal's men rushed to the tank. It was bolted shut from the outside. They pried it open. Inside, battered and bruised but alive, were Michael and Martin. Miller hadn't killed them. He was planning to leave them to drown when he refilled the tank in the morning. A tragic accident. No witnesses. "It's over, Miller," Michael gasped, stumbling out of the tank. James made a desperate move, pulling a pistol. But before he could fire, Katerina acted. She let out a piercing scream in Czech, a string of what sounded like curses. James, in his arrogant prejudice, flinched. He thought she was casting some foreign spell. That split second of hesitation was all the marshal needed. A single shot from his shotgun sent James's pistol flying. It was over. As the marshal's men rounded up the rest of the ranch hands, Katerina rushed to Michael's side. He was bruised, exhausted, but his blue eyes were full of a fierce, profound relief. "You did it," he whispered, his hand finding hers. "You brought him down." She looked at the man she had almost married, now in chains, his empire of fear and hatred crumbling around him. She looked at the open graves, a testament to the lives he had destroyed. And she looked at the man beside her, the man who had seen her not as a foreign object, but as a person. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky with the colors of a new day. A day of justice, a day of beginnings. 3 months later, Katerina stood on the porch of the Crosswind Ranch. It was her home now. James Miller was awaiting trial, his guilt assured by the confession and the bodies unearthed from his land. The story of the foreign mail-order bride who brought down the most powerful man in the territory had become a local legend. She had been offered the teaching position in New Prague, a community that would have welcomed her with open arms, but she had chosen a different path. Here at Crosswind, she had found something more than just acceptance. She had found a partnership. She taught English and Czech to the children of the ranch hands in a small schoolhouse they had built together. She played her violin during the lively, multicultural Saturday night gatherings. Her recipes were now a beloved part of Martha's kitchen. She had not erased her past. She had woven it into the fabric of her new life, creating something stronger and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Michael came and stood beside her, his arm sliding comfortably around her waist. "Good news?" he asked, nodding toward the letter in her hand. "From Joseph," she said, smiling. "New Prague is thriving, and he wants to know when we'll be visiting." "Soon," Michael promised. He looked out at the sprawling, diverse, and peaceful ranch they were building together. "But right now, I think we're exactly where we need to be." Katerina leaned her head on his shoulder, the vast Montana sky stretching out before them, no longer a symbol of emptiness, but of infinite possibility. She had traveled across the world searching for a home, only to find that home wasn't a place you were given. It was a place you built, with courage, with justice, and with love. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. We have a new story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. Click the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.